So since the EU integration process is so important of a strategic objective for the Kosovo government, then the coordination process for the growth plan for Kosovo was located at the office of the Prime Minister, and the first Deputy Prime Minister was appointed as the chief negotiator for this process. And then with him, there were 7 key ministers and their advisors who were in charge and who were actually involved in this process of negotiating and drafting the reform agenda.
It's an expert group composed of people within the Prime Minister's office. I coordinated on behalf of the First Deputy Prime Minister, and it was one chief of cabinet in each of the 7 key ministries which were negotiating the steps, the qualitative and quantitative steps. It was mainly led by a strong leadership, ownership, and as well as dedication to respond to the upcoming EC guidelines and requests. Overall, it's people who can already work only in English, with background in EU affairs and knowledge of EU reforms and acquis-related reforms.
With the formalization first, it's important to note that within this process, the work was being done parallelly by our governments and also the EU Commission. What this means is that while the EU Commission and the EU regulation on the growth plan was being drafted, we were also parallelly working with the reform agendas and also the narrative within the plan. So this was a very key important process because we did not have grounds for formalization of the work, so then we decided to keep it non-formal but actually involve all the people who work within the EU integration process and the key areas that were involved within the reform agenda. So the mandate of these involved people was to actually analyze, negotiate and draft the reform agendas as well as the narrative of the growth plan.
Already all EU integration structures of the government of Kosovo were involved, and the previous people who have been designing such as European Reform Agenda or National Plan for European Integration were involved in this. All responsible institutions to implement the reform agenda were involved in the design of it. We didn't want the top-bottom approach to lead this process, but rather the negotiations and the agreement with the reforms, basically the steps in the reform agenda. These people are already knowledgeable how the EU planning and the conditionality works. So we trained through CEF. We also organized workshops and ourselves have been learning from our examples, and finally everyone was well aware of what is the next steps in designing and planning the reform agenda. Besides the ministries, we had also the Parliament of Kosovo, Kosovo Judicial Council, Kosovo Prosecutor Council, independent agencies. So all relevant stakeholders were involved. There was very little time, unfortunately, to consult properly with civil society and with other stakeholders such as chambers of commerce and businesses, but yet we managed to do so. In month April and May, we shared the steps with these stakeholders, including the bilateral partners and international financial institutions. Strong political leadership, enthusiasm about the EU reforms, and believing that these reforms can make a change in coming closer to the single market and coming closer to the EU. For us, it was also a timely exercise because we had just finalized the European Reform Agenda 2. So this was a new set of requirements and reforms that we can engage in next 3-4 years. Adding to that we applied as Kosovo for EU membership 2 years ago. This is something that will prepare us in when the assessment through the questionnaire comes to play. We used an approach of forward-looking and anticipation, what is coming next, but also experience in working with such complex documents helped a lot. So people, direct English language and motivation for EU reforms.
It always starts with the people. The vast support that Kosovo population has for the EU integration process at 94% gives solid ground for the political decision makers to keep pushing forward for the reforms. So that's our secret ingredient for keeping this going.
We still believe in you. Let's keep pushing forward.